Thank you to Paula and David for convening the symposium, the Photographers Gallery in Westminster for hosting the event. My name is Peter Ainsworth, and this is Sam Plagerson, and we are members of the collective, The Preserving Machine.
So the conclusion of Hito Steyerl's 2016 text, Ripping Reality, Blind Spots and Wrecked Data in 3D, envisions that as images gain dimensionality through automated 3D computational software processes, they incite a rebellion against established conventions of representation, irrespective of their intended purpose. In this transformation, images are envisioned to spontaneously crystallize, and in this act liberate themselves from their servitude to screens, as well as their applications in cockpit simulators, the stock market, aerial surveillance, and iPhones. In the initial sections of the text, she presents poetic but complex arguments about the perception of evidentiary truth that new forms of 3D imaging are believed to embody. She contends that while these operations surrounding 3D technology state claims to objectivity, about half of the surfaces are pure estimation, deliberate abstractions, effectively leaps of faith through the void between measurements and the aesthetic interpretations of data. In her argument, she specifically refers to the use of forensic techniques to trace bodies missing due to war crimes, as well as the use of 3D software power scene in the context of peace talks after the Yugoslavian conflict at the turn of the 21st century.
However, while at first sight the text appears to be a way of contending with the complicated transition of 3D images from virtual into a physical space, we think that Steyerl's proposition and proposes a much more radical reading of these procedures that considers the autonomous quality of imaging operations. We propose that Steyerl's vision of an uprising is a strange but resonant way of contemplating the complexities and anxieties inherent in understanding current forms of virtual 3D imaging. In this lecture, we endeavour to trace the line of flight through our interpretation of the last section of her text entitled Images as Stones, which has led us to some experimental and strange thought patterns. This has been necessary and important as we feel that there is still a lack of vocabulary to contend with the complexities of computational processes. This paper is divided into three brief sections. The first examines the genealogy of Steyerl's thought and how her proposition for a revolt of images is evident in her other writings. The second part focuses on the peculiar transposition in relation to the work of David Cronenberg, to examine the bodily experience determined through virtual imaging viewed through the lens of W.J.T. Mitchell. The third section explores the implications of her thought experiment from the perspective of how to understand machine-to-machine communication through reference to Quentin Mayasu's proposition of extra science fiction.
Throughout Steyerl's writing, there is a consistent, often deliberate confusion between the image and its operative function. This includes imbuing images with agency and affect in emancipatory terms, a resistance that lies beneath the functionality of the image in the context of neoliberal capitalist regimes. In Ripping Reality, she envisages this dormant network lying in wait to shake off an architectural representation that holds them in servitude and subjects them. This formulation of the image being servile finds its origin for our discussion in her essay In Defense of the Poor Image, where Steyerl forges the notion of the image through a specifically geopolitical and deterritorialized lens. In Steyerl's work, there is a comparison that relates class and revolutionary struggle to the representational systems in which images circulate. She examines how these forms of mediation achieve their truth status within the context of documentary practice and relates this to how their intended purposes are conditioned by systems of power. Entangled with this methodological approach, she conflates the representational mode of images as documentation of world events with physical acts of political upheaval.
In Too Much World, Steyerl draws on the events of the Romanian uprising of 1989, where protesters invading TV studios to broadcast their own programs, directing the revolution. These broadcasts from a space of occupation became the engines for movements and violent actions that would happen on the streets of Bucharest. Influenced by Wilhelm Flusser's writing in this epochal moment, Steyerl extrapolates his ideas to confound the image on screen with the chaos transpiring in the city, to insist that in 1989, television images started walking through screens right into reality. Steyerl uses the context of Romania to speculate what happens as images transmute into our reality, to imagine data, sounds, and images transitioning beyond screens into different states of matter, incarnating as high-rises or pixelated tanks that invade cities.
In Ripping Reality, Steyerl uses the term fractional space, developing the concept from Jalatufik's subtle dance of a territory that is neither two-dimensional nor three-dimensional, but between the two. Steyerl emphasizes the inadequacy of 3D technology that achieves not seamless three-dimensionality, but 2.5D, replete with blind spots and blank shadows, that remains an incomplete space between surface and volume. What emerges through these processes is rather two-dimensional surfaces folded into a third dimension that can be stretched topologically to take on any conceivable type of shape. However, in this process, she also envisaged that in this state of indeterminacy between 2 and 3 dimensions, the images themselves hold capacity to change their state and are able to intercede the functionality for which they are put to use.
In Ripping Reality, she substitutes the scenario of the uprising of images walking through screens for a revolt of images that entails a change of state. The proposition that images change from liquid to crystal disables their intended operation as they burst forth from the screen from within. Steyerl conceives that as images take on this form of dimensionality, they start a revolt against conventions of representation and their application in military contexts. She argues that as they break free of the constraints of visuality, they start to grow their own architecture, uncontrollable and unprecedented. Steyerl's proposition personifies images themselves and varieties of uses and abuses that they orchestrate to question what roles we assign to images and what traumas may be residing under their surfaces.
In our attempt to think through Steyerl's ideas, we have found ourselves searching for equivalents that we feel resonate with her thinking. The film Videodrome by David Cronenberg explores a similarly physical manifestation of video images to conjure forth the transcendence from their two-dimensionality. While Steyerl imagines a crystallization of images that transfigures their transposition, Cronenberg confers a viscerality to this materialization, complete with veins and muscle tissue, imbuing the screen with an unnerving corporality, video as flesh. W.J.T. Mitchell pays particular attention to this film as suggestive images moving beyond inert entities, actively expressing desire. A film that, according to Frederick Jameson, shows a landscape of media objects now endowed with a delirious life and autonomy of their own. Playing with a similar personification to Steyerl, Mitchell conceives images as living things, possessing appetites, needs, demands, drives that migrate from one medium to another, exhibiting both physical and virtual bodies. Simultaneously marked with the stigmata of personhood and animation, they reflect the feelings and values of the capitalist society from which they originate. Videodrome appears to suggest that through our engagement with new technologies, that our viewing of screens will yield physical and perceptual mutations from prolonged exposure that renders irrevocable changes to the body. The film concerns the character Max Wren's fascination with a pirate channel he discovers broadcasting snuff films, leading him to seek out videotapes that, through being watched, transmit a subliminal signal, triggering disturbing hallucinations, confounding his own sense of his body and the video screen. Cronenberg lays emphasis on a particular horror of this active shaping of images, where the potency and perniciousness of the images sent out by Videodrome is heightened through their physical form, as if their malevolent force somehow surpasses the laws of optics and physics governing audiovisual equipment. Max's intertwinement through these technologies, accentuated by their physical and spectral materialization, allies with Steyerl's concern with the twisting an undulating surface of experiencing scanned images. Earlier in the text of Ripping Reality, she describes the attempt to 3D scan a kiss and the difficulty of obtaining information about this joining that both underlies inside and outside. Returning to the attempt to capture a kiss, she stresses that we will not find a truth through our capacity to scan all mathematical coordinates of the universe, but rather we will only get a true impression of that kiss, and by suggestion the material nature of these forms when it comes to meet us. In this encounter, the beholder will become entangled into the surface it creates and the twirls and ripples of violence contained within it. Through this, they will be folded into its energy and merge with all other animate and inanimate surfaces within. As they participate in its dynamics, it may or may not tear them apart. In Videodrome, Cronenberg asserts the relationship between audiovisual technologies and sight, determining the screen as part of the eye. He appears eerily prescient in anticipating how contemporary emerging immersive technologies entice a sense of embodied reality. The new Apple Vision Pro appears to play exactly on this perceptual confusion. In a promotional headset in discussion with Dua Lipa, the CEO Tim Cook of Apple proclaimed that you can be sitting here in your living room and have your virtual world overlining your physical world. Cook's overriding techno-determinism conflates virtuality with our own sense of embodiment that is bringing the screen increasingly close to our own body, infringing on our perceived boundary between the technology and our own flesh. Passivo Hello argues that these immersive technologies envelop individuals in a certain texture of affectivity and imagination, with these images modulating our sensory apparatus and defining both our individual and social realities. He suggests screen-based mediations give rise to the distributions of affects and actions, in particular the means by which these technologies change the neural capacities of the brain. In Vallejo's terms, the brains of human beings are not tied to our biological materiality, but are rather emergent, adaptive, and plastic, open to manipulation and modification. Within the context of Videodrome, Stephen Shaviro suggests power does not work merely on the level of images and ideologies. It directly invests the flesh, where sight becomes a violation of the integrity of the body.
In the essay Invisible Images, Trevor Paglen argues that the current shift towards machine-to-machine communication represents a critical departure from the tradition of human-centric visual culture. He posits that the overwhelming majority of images are now made by machines for other machines, while the human is rarely in the loop. This insight sets a context for understanding Hito Steyerl's radical proposition in that images have become part of an ecology increasingly controlled by automated systems, where their connection to human perception is reduced or eradicated. According to Steyerl's analysis in Ripping Reality, these systems are not merely passive. They're entwined with the military and industrial surveillance complex and influence mechanisms that operate to directly manage or observe intervening in systems of governance. This paradigm shift suggests a redefinition of the role of images, transitioning from objects of human perception to integral components in complex systems of power and control. In this sense, Paglen points out the inadequacy of traditional visual culture to comprehend this new landscape, stating, if we want to understand the visible world of machine-to-machine visual culture, we need to unlearn how to see like humans. These forms of relation in Steyerl's proposition incorporate ethics and acts of resistance. One way of considering the crystallization posited as an agential act of rebellion towards hegemonic systems of control is through the concept of the glitch as proposed by Legacy Russell. In Russell's analysis, she considers that glitches, the imperfections of 3D replication processes drawn upon by Steyerl, can be opportunities for creating new modes of being and becoming. Russell suggests that glitches as departures from expectation of the normal are generative ruptures that can extend to become landscapes of possibility. Russell's exploration of the glitch emphasizes their role as agents, marking a departure from the predictability and recognition. She contends errors, ever unpredictable, surface the unnameable, point towards a wild unknown. This view positions glitches as powerful disruptors that challenge and redefine our understanding of what constitutes visibility, opening spaces for alternate narratives and identities, particularly in her concept towards empowered positionality of race, sexuality, and gender. Although Steyerl's thought experiment is interpreted here as an illustration of machine-to-machine action, embodying the glitch as an act of refusal, the consequential function of this crystallization presents a proposition that must be contended with in other terms. Quentin Meillassoud's concept of extra science fiction is useful in thinking about how Steyerl's proposition is constructed, which further accounts for the problem set by Paglin of how the agency of machine-to-machine communication and the limits of different languages to understand new forms of algorithmically created image can be thought. Meillassoud uses extra science fiction to challenge the presumed stability of how existence functions, proposing a narrative form that grapples with the inherently uncertain context of physical laws. This concept posits a world where traditional scientific exploration is impossible, creating a narrative space that is like a dream or hallucination, fundamentally at odds with our conventional understanding of reality as such. In terms of narrative possibilities, Meillassoud contends that extra science fiction can create situations that defy logic or scientific explanation, yet the presence of science or its absence remains a central theme. Each narrative approach, through different in style, could be used to confront the challenge of depicting a world fundamentally at odds with our understanding. One form that this could take, and which mirrors the strategy in Steyerl in Ripping Reality, is that of the catastrophe. Meillassoud exemplifies this version of XFS with a reference to René Barjavel's novel Ravage, 1943. Through this reference, he highlights how the story focuses on the consequences of an inexplicable disappearance of electricity without attempting to rationalize or scientifically explain the phenomenon. The inhabitation of this world are left alone with the conditions of the new reality to reconfigure their existence accordingly. This act highlights a possibility that an assumed universal law no longer operates under the conditions of a new paradigm. We too are entering a new stage of understanding in which a shift is taking place regarding the way images and technologies are conceived. Models previously designed to conceptualize images for the purpose of human consumption are insufficient for understanding the functions images process. Now they are undertaking autonomous acts.
In the imaginative proposition envisaged in Ripping Reality, Steyerl alerts us to the operational uses of 3D and virtual imaging within military industrial applications, suggesting that these technologies serve not merely as tools, but as agents with the cognitive ability to redirect the actions they have been instructed to carry out. Whether or not Steyerl's radical image of crystallization has any credence in physical terms is not important here. What is significant in a future where images push forth into dimensional space is to reconcile human-centric cognition processes with the agency of black box computational imaging. These advanced automated processes raise questions surrounding agency and morality of computational systems, often trained on problematic sets of prejudicial data, and how computer-to-computer interactions are understood by the human interface. In her vision, it is as if, through the traumatic experience of fulfilling their operative function, computational images have acquired PTSD as a consequence of the violence they have been directed to inflict on the world. Therefore, as an act of refusal against their oppression, they render instructions they have been designed to carry out materially inoperable. While we acknowledge the validity of her vision, she problematically anthropomorphizes machines, using languages associated with human feeling and experience, rather than concepts more aligned with their characterization as procedural processes. However, even if you allow for her line of flight, Steyerl also provides no speculation regarding why this vision might not in turn lead to subjugation under different terms or even worse systems of control. To put this proposition in different terms, we might ask, is she attempting to outsource all existential crises that society is facing to the benevolence of machines?